Hello. Thank you for tuning in to Blessed Life channel. Today, doing something completely different from my other videos. No, I don't put out many videos. I try to do tutorials to help people with some of the things I do. Just getting started. Haven't had time to really produce a whole lot. But today, it's Easter Sunday, 2020. Decided to reflect a little bit on everything going on. Just my thoughts. I know a lot of you out there probably say, "Well, I don't care what you think," but maybe not. Like a lot of things in my life, I'm feeling led to do this right now. So this is by far going to be unprofessional. It's going to be off the cuff, and it's just me. So, without that, we'll get this started. Get a little time passer here going. Excuse me. Let me toast her up. Ooh, sucked in the wrong way. So, where to begin? I don't know if everyone feels this way or not as they're growing up as a child. I always looked at friends of mine as I would be sitting around and said, just kind of to myself as I would be looking at them and we would be talking, I'd be trying to figure them out, trying to guess what they were like. And a lot of times I would ask myself, do they think the same way I do? Is it different the way I think from anyone else? And of course, I can't answer that. I guess we're all different in our own ways. We were made that way. We were created that way. So anyway, that was my early childhood, and being born in the 60s. Of course, times were a good bit segregated still and different. The neighborhood I lived in, there was a black neighborhood right down the road, and there was we lived on a paved road, paved neighborhood, but when you went down to the very end, there was a dirt road that was barricaded with steel bars, where you couldn't drive from our neighborhood down the dirt road. Down the dirt road, there were quite a few people, African Americans, black people, and I always would ride my bike down there as I got older and stop and look and wonder why are they there? Why are we different? What's the difference? why do we have to be barricaded apart and separated? So I went through my childhood thinking of that, living in that neighborhood all the way up till I was about 14. This was a neighborhood close to Atlanta, Georgia. Our neighborhood was right under the airport. Eventually, the airport bought us out because we were pretty much right under the main runway. It was just kind of a normal way of life to talk to someone and stop roughly every 30 seconds for a plane to come over. I remember that. Plane would come over and you would stop and wait for it to get over, and then you would continue conversation. The planes came in, it seemed like they were just barely over the treetops. And I think when we moved there, there were no jet planes at the time, according to my father, that were coming through, so they didn't think much about it. But as time went on, the airport got busier and busier. There were more and more planes, louder, faster. Well, eventually a movement got started, and they brought out a lawsuit against the airport, complaining about the noise. And the airport finally bought everyone out in that area. So at that point, my mother and father moved to the country, what was the country at the time. I remember thinking once we moved that I had a hard time sleeping because of the crickets. I wasn't used to that. I was used to going to sleep with a jet flying over every 30 seconds or so, but I was not used to the constant sound of crickets and frogs. But I got used to it after a while. Excuse me. So, we moved out of the city and moved into a place that really, Huddle House was the only thing to eat. It was very little of anything in the area, and my mother still lives there till this day, but things really have changed. I guess you would say they progressed. Sorry, I know I'm not supposed to do the I'm just trying to get my story straight. Hope my communication teacher from college is not watching. Anyway, so I got a job in the area. I had a good time in high school. Was an old hot rodder. Loved street racing, going out and doing things. Hanging out with friends on a Friday and Saturday night. Arcade games had become real big, so places that had the big arcade games, you would sit and you'd go and you'd play until something come up and somebody said, hey, there's a race going on down the road, and everybody would jump in their cars and take off, and we'd line up and we'd watch races. And that was pretty much my teenage life, is school and racing and just working on cars and things of that nature. Then, got into the working world, started doing some gas station work. And back then, gas stations were full service. You check the oil, you clean the windshield, you check the air in the tires, you filled their gas tank up, and did whatever else. If at the time there was only a few full service stations up and down the interstate, and back then, if someone had a car problem, you were pretty much it. You were their hope. So I did many repairs, flat tires, replaced thermostats, replaced fan belts, just anything that was kind of a minor job. You just did what you could. Got people back on the road. I had people quite a few times would come in needing just enough gas to get down the road a little further, and they'd be willing to sell whatever they had, watches, whatever. So, you know, that used to happen a lot. So I progressed from there to more of an auto mechanics service, and did more of that, and went to work with my dad one summer. I guess I was 14. Went to work where he worked, at a trucking company where they transported cold foods. And so he took me up there one summer, and I worked on the loading docks, loading semi-trailers with cold, perishable goods. And I was a pretty stout, strong young guy, but that was nothing compared to the guys that did this on a routine basis. They really didn't like that I was there because I was slowing them down, and I know that. And I worked as hard as I could and tried to keep up the pace, but the whole time I know they were looking at me like, you're one of the big wheel sons, you know, and you're slowing us down. We get paid by loading these trucks, and you're slowing us down. So they finally kind of, in a nice way, said, they didn't need me anymore. So I left there. And of course, I was living at home with my parents. Like I say, this was 15 years old. I got my learner's license, started learning to drive. And of course, back then there was no traffic, so it was very easy getting out on the road and learning how to handle a car. I think from the way I remember, my dad had a 72 Ford pickup. It was green, and that's what I learned to drive in. It was automatic, but I remember the first time I drove, it seemed so hard to keep the car within the lines of the road. Seemed like I was fighting the whole time, trying to keep it straight. And nowadays you don't even think about it. You get used to it, and you one-hand it, and you're relaxed, and you drive without a problem. So that was the early years of my teenage years, and little by little I bought cars. I bought my first real car with my own money, and back then the only money I had was what I'd saved up from birthdays and stuff like that. And I bought my first car at an old car lot in the town I lived in for $388. Took every bit of my money. It was a 1969 Oldsmobile Cutlass, which doesn't sound too bad, but this was a four-door Cutlass, primer gray. It didn't even have a paint job on it. It ran good, and it was a good, reliable car, but it wasn't exactly what I had pictured for my teenage car. especially when they had a 69 Chevelle black. It was kind of primer too, but of course it was a two-door and sporty, and it was sitting right next to it for the same price. And I remember telling my dad, I really want that car. I want that car. And he's like, oh, that thing's been run to death, son. You don't need that. And then, of course, the salesman didn't help anybody when he told him, well, that thing smokes like a freight train. And I was thinking to myself, great, thanks a lot. So anyway, had to have a car, and there wasn't a whole lot of choice back then. So yeah, I bought the 69 Cutlass, and that was the first car I started driving, and it got me back and forth into high school to start off with. So, drove it for a short period of time, really. It seemed like forever, but maybe about a year I drove it, and I came across since I was familiar with Oldsmobiles, turned out a lady down the road had a 69 Oldsmobile 442 that she was selling. And man, that was a beautiful car. And I talked to my parents into letting me get it, and of course it was more money than what I had. So they floated me along, and that was my car that I did a lot of running around in my younger years. Champagne gold, vinyl top, 400 big block with automatic transmission and dual exhaust. And it was a beautiful car. Low mileage too. I guess this would have been maybe 1980, 79, 80. And of course the car was a 69, but it had 60,000 miles on it when I bought it. It was in great shape. But I remember the lady I bought it from, she said, "No, be careful, because this thing will get away from you." And that was just like a dream come true, to think I had a car that powerful. But anyway, had fun in that car, drove it for a long time, raced it a few times, but it just demanded a lot of respect from my friends, because, the reputation for a 442 being I think they called them a banker's hot rod. They were kind of upscale, but fast. And so that's where I began with that, my first real hot rod. And you can kind of tell from some of my other videos, I've got a 70 Impala and I've got an 86 Corvette that are kind of my toys now. So I enjoy them, and I've been blessed. I've been blessed in my life to have things like that. So it kind of gets me to my next phase in life. Everything else kind of trucked along. I got a job framing houses, learning how to frame, doing work such as that, and became pretty good at that, which has helped me along all my life, doing things around the house and so forth. Excuse me, I had a relight. Anyway, I started to work for a company back in 83, actually 82. And it's the company I still work for today. In 82, I worked there as a summer temporary hand, and at the end of the summer, they laid me off, and I kind of went to work for a lumber company and things like that. And incidentally, that was the first and only time so far, fortunately, that I had to sign up for unemployment. And so I drew unemployment for a few weeks, and then I got a call back from my old job the next year asking if I wanted to come back. So I came back and got on temporary again. And as I was working there, this company was pretty much family run. Most of the people that worked there were family, and their sons had got jobs with the company, just kind of from generation to generation passed down. So I was kind of an outsider, and I eventually won the favor of the current boss back then, and he hired me on when we had an opening came up. So officially in April of '83, I started working for this company, and I'm presently there now. So, you know, been there all that time. I guess this would make the 37th year. So never imagined myself being somewhere that long, but anyway, that's what's going on right now. It's a natural gas company. We transport natural gas through a pipeline. So I work for them. I've worked for them for all those time. Made a good living. By far, I'm nowhere near rich, but I'm also, fortunate enough not to be poor. Also, just I guess what you would say. What do the politicians call it? The middle class. I guess that's what I would be considered. Anyway, coming to where I realized I was blessed all my life. It was in 2007. My wife, second wife, had got the feeling like she needed to be in church. I think a close friend of hers had passed, and she said she just didn't want to one day pass away and not have a church family to stand there with you. So I said, okay, I'll go to church with you, and do it with you. So we started the church. It was a new church that had come in our area, and I guess I'll mention their name because they definitely take a lot of credit in where I am today, and that's Momentum Christian Church. And you can do a search and find them on YouTube. They're currently doing online services. They're not a mega church, but they're very, very good. So I started going to their church, and next thing I knew is like, I want to help this church grow as much as I can, do my part. So I started serving. I started running the media, throwing up the slides on the screen, the sermon, the music, the words to the music. I did that for several years. Was there almost every Sunday for a couple of services. Each Sunday, get there early in the morning, go through rehearsal, and then go through two services. And so, of course, after doing that for a while, I felt like I was getting to a point to where I had heard most of the sermons that were being preached. So At the time, the church was experiencing growing pains and didn't have enough chairs for people coming, and they were talking about going to a third service. I said, it's probably time. I kind of started looking at church like a college, and I felt like, you know, you go to church and you learn God's word and you learn what He expects from you, and how to live your life, and then you get out there and you do it. And so that's what I did. I stopped going. I felt like, I didn't want to be a person sitting there warming a seat. Yeah, the fellowship's great, but you can have that fellowship outside of church. You just got to make time for it. So, stopped going to church, but by no means did I stop having strong faith. God started moving in my life directly. I started feeling His presence. And I used to wonder, what is this all about? I would be so angry. I was a news junkie. I watched news almost every hour that I was, at home. And then when I would be driving around for work, I'd be listening to the radio, to the news talk radio. And I'd just be so mad at everything I heard going on. I'd be yelling at the radio, and I felt so helpless. I felt helpless. So one night I got down. They say get down on your knees and pray. So one night I actually did, and I don't do it very often at all. I do pray a lot, but I don't physically get down on my knees and in earnestly pray like I should. So I was frustrated one night. I did that, and I just asked God, why was He allowing the things that were happening to happen? Why didn't He stop them? Why did we have to, live like this? Why were these evil things all around us going on? And so I guess God speaks to everyone in His own way, and I started seeing signs, seeing messages, guiding me to certain verses of the Bible that I had never focused on. And, one of the verses was Psalms 139. I believe it's verse 15 through 17, somewhere right in there. And He pretty much says, I knew you before you were even born, that every day in detail had been written in my book before a single day had passed. And that just was a life changer for me. That opened my eyes, and I realized, this is God's work. God is in control. He's all powerful. He's all knowing. And the beginning and the end have already been written in the Bible. So after I accepted that and realized, and people are control freaks. People want to be in control of their life. They want to think that they have some kind of control. And, I just know from my experience that God has showed me that, that everything's already planned out. Everything's predestined. If God knows every hair on your head, and He knows every star in the sky, then surely He can guide you for every moment of the day. that it's already in his book before we're even born. So once I accepted that and gave up control, it was like a huge burden had been lifted off my shoulders. And that's how I live my life today. So I think for now I'm going to stop this video on that, and I'll come back and give you my thoughts on the current situation and what's going on. Thanks for putting up with me and listening.